In this video, I'm going to show you how to repair old film negatives in Photoshop. This is the image that we're going to work with. It was submitted by one of our viewers, Jeff Bella. Jeff is currently in the process of digitizing old film negatives, and he came across a really interesting problem when color correcting the images in Photoshop. As you can see, the old film negatives have deteriorated and they've created this strong yellow-green color cast, but they didn't deteriorate evenly. As you can see, some areas retain the original colors, and that causes a problem when color correcting the images. And when Jeff emailed me asking for help, I thought that it will make a fantastic tutorial for two reasons. Number one, you get to see my thought process, how I think about an image and how I think about problems and how to solve them. And number two, I'm going to show you things that I probably wouldn't show you under normal circumstances, so I think that you'll learn a lot from this video, so make sure that you stick around into the very end. Even if you never have to repair an old film negative yourself, I'm sure that you're going to learn a lot. So why don't we jump right into the tutorial? And by the way, if you would like to follow along with this image, then you can download it from my website. You can find the link to it in the description. Let's start by analyzing this image. What is the problem? Well, we have a strong yellow-green color cast, and as you might have seen in previous tutorials, there is a method that I like using for color correcting images, which is in the curves adjustment layer. And if you hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on Auto, Photoshop will bring up the auto color correction options. If you're unfamiliar with this feature, don't worry, I have a tutorial where I talk all about it. I'll place a link to it below in the description, but for now, I'm just gonna talk about it really quickly and in general terms. But anyway, from here, you have 4 algorithms that you can use to color correct your image, and you can click on them and see the type of changes that they apply to your photo. But notice that in this case, none of the algorithms work. And that's because when you look at the image, we do have a strong color cast, but at the same time, we actually have something that is very close to white that does not have a color cast and something that is close to black. Look at the building here. See how this area didn't deteriorate as much as the rest of the image? Well, Photoshop is picking up these white pixels and is basing the color correction off of this area, and also this dark area is almost black, so again, Photoshop thinks that we do have white and black on the image, so none of these algorithms work. So what do? Well, you can delete the layer mask and then select the lasso tool and just make a selection around areas of your image that don't have that color issue, like so. Then you can create a layer mask. So click on the layer mask icon. So now we have this adjustment layer only affecting the areas that I made a selection around. Then click on the curves adjustment layer thumbnail and go into the properties panel again, hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on Auto. And again, go through the different algorithms and see which one gives you a good result. And in this case, Enhance per channel contrast gives you a very good result. Also, I have Snap Neutral Midtones check, and that gives me, I think, a better result. So this is much better. I'm going to press OK. And now I can simply delete the layer mask so that Photoshop applies that color correction to the entire image. And this is where we can really see the problem of the areas that didn't deteriorate evenly. Notice that when we apply the color adjustment to the image, the areas that were deteriorated look great, but the areas that didn't deteriorate evenly do not look great. So this is what we need to fix. Now, how do we fix that? Well, if you create a black and white adjustment layer, you'll notice that the image looks relatively okay. Maybe these areas here don't look well, but this tells me that the real problem lies with the color and not the detail. So now we have to think of a way of separating detail and color. How do we do that? There's actually a really simple way. If you select your background, you can just right-click on it and convert it into a smart object. Now that this layer is in a smart object, we can apply non-destructive effects, or even better in this case, we can double-click on it and open it up in a new tab. In this new tab, we can go into Image, Mode, and change it from RGB to LAB. The LAB color mode puts detail in one channel and then colors in 2 other channels. Let me show you how that works. In the channels panel, you can see that we have the lightness. This is where we have all the detail. And the A channel has the balance between green and magenta, much like the tint slider. and the B channel has the balance between blue and yellow, much like the temperature slider in Lightroom or Camera Raw. And as you can see in the blue channel, the problem areas are very noticeable. So this is how we're going to fix this image. We're going to work in the LAB color mode inside of the smart object, and the RGB image will look just fine. Now, before we start adjusting the image, let me show you how this color mode works. Let's start with the lightness. Select it from the channels panel, then go into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and drag the gamma slider to the right to make it darker. Press OK, then bring back the LAB composite, and you'll notice that the image got darker without affecting anything else. In the A channel, if I go into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and make it darker, I get more green. If I make it brighter, I get more magenta. Next, I'll select the B channel and go back into the levels adjustment. If I make it darker, I get more blue. And if I make it brighter, I get more yellow. If you notice, the B channel is very bright, which is creating the yellow color cast, but we're not going to worry about it for now. What I'm really concerned about is the blotches here. So how do we fix these? Well, before we get into this complicated area, let me show you a simple example first. So I'm going to zoom in to the top area here, and you can see that we have these problem areas. You can easily fix these by selecting the spot healing brush tool and then selecting either darken or lighten depending on the blemish or distraction that you're trying to remove. In this case, the distraction is dark, so I'm going to select lighten. If the distraction was bright, then you would select darken. So I'll select lighten, and then I'll paint on these areas like so, and Photoshop starts removing them. If you want to, you can try using the patch tool and then click and drag a selection like so and move it to an area like this area down here that doesn't have that issue, and release, and Photoshop will patch that area. Totally up to you. So I'm just gonna make a few adjustments like this and try to fix that area there as best as I can, like so. And I think that this is looking pretty good. By the way, when you make a selection, you can press Control D on Windows, Command D to deselect. So that's looking pretty good. So when I bring back the LAB color mode, you can see that I fix that area. If you forgot what that looks like, let me show you what it used to look like before. If you go into Window and History, you can just see your history and just go back to before you applied any of the spot healing brush adjustments. So this is before and this is after. See how we hid some of that blue that was in there. Obviously, you need to spend a little more time fine-tuning the image to get better results, but that's how you would do it. So the real problem lies here in these buildings, and we're going to use the B channel to fix these areas so that we can actually see the luminosity of the B channel. Make sure that you click on the LAB composite and then click on the B channel again to see the actual brightness of this channel. And notice these dark areas. These are the areas that are causing all the problems in this image. And notice that there is no detail there. So we will not be able to use the spot healing brush tool or the patch tool because there's no detail to copy from that will match the original pixels. But the lightness channel does have some of that detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal the information from the lightness channel and apply it to the B channel. So with the lasso tool, I'm just going to click and drag and make a selection around these areas that have that issue, and maybe even include these areas up here. So I'm holding Shift to add to my selection, like so. Then I'm going to go into the lightness channel, press Control C on Windows, Command C on the Mac to copy, go into the blue channel and paste those pixels in there. Before we do anything else, what you should do is save the selection in case you ever need it again. So I'm going to create a new channel and fill with white. That way, if I deselect and do something else, or maybe I want to come back tomorrow and keep working on that same area, I can select those pixels again, exactly the same pixels. And you can select them by holding Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and clicking on the channel thumbnail, and it loads them as a selection. Now in the blue channel, I need to make sure that these pixels match the rest of the image, because at the moment, look at what they look like. See how there's so much blue in there? That's because there's a lot of dark areas here, which create blue, and a lot of brighter areas, which create even more yellow. So what you want to do now is press Control H on Windows, Command H on the Mac to hide the marching ants. I'm not deleting the marching ants. The marching ants are still there. I'm just hiding them so that we can work without them distracting us. Again, pressing Control H on Windows, Command H on the Mac brings them back. So I'm hiding them for now. And I'm going to go into Image Adjustment Levels, and I'm going to try to match this area to the background. And if you notice, the background is really dull. There's really no dark areas or no bright areas, only a little bit of detail. You can see the windows here. So I'm going to try to match that. So I'm going to go into my output levels to make the darkest color this shade of gray, which is not very dark. And I'm going to go and drag this one to the left to make my brightest color this shade of gray with just off-white. And then I can adjust my gamma and try to match it as best as possible. And just keep adjusting it until you get something that matches. Again, you're never going to get a perfect match, but try to get it as close as you can. And it might take you a few minutes of fine-tuning the image till you get something that's passable. And I think this will work. So I will press OK. Now when I go back into the LAB image, you can see now that the building is starting to look much better. And when I say better, I don't mean that we're removing the color cast. I mean that it's matching the rest of the image. So at this point, I'm just going to pause here for a second, and I'm going to press Control S on Windows, Command S on the Mac to save, go back into my working document and look at the difference. See how we no longer have the blue? It used to look blue like up here, but notice how now it doesn't have that blue tone. So we're already improving the image. And by the way, the reason that I converted the layer into a smart object to begin with was so that we can change the color of the layer to LAB in the smart object and not in our working document, because as great as LAB is, you cannot use all the Photoshop adjustment layers or filters in LAB. So in case you needed to use any of those, you still can, and you can make all your LAB adjustments inside of the smart object. And once you save it and close it, you're back with your original smart object, and you can make your adjustments that way. What I'm going to do now is continue working on these areas. So I'm going to zoom in, and the reason that it didn't quite match the tone of the building below is because we haven't adjusted the A channel. If we remember, the A channel controls the balance between green and magenta. So we're going to have to work with that channel next to try to match the tones. So in the A channel, I don't have a lot of detail. So that trick of copying and pasting from the Lightness channel is not going to work on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that everything is enabled. And then I'm going to click on the A channel and click on the eye icon so that I can see the composite view, but I'm really working on the A channel. And then I'm going to work with the dodge or burn tool, which allow me to either brighten or darken the image. And all I have to do is just paint over the image to brighten or darken pixels selectively. So let me show you how that works. If I select the dodge tool and I start painting, I add more magenta. I'll undo that. If I select the burn tool and start painting, I add more green. And actually, you know what? You can only select one tool, like the dodge tool, and when you paint, you'll paint with the dodge tool. But if you hold Alt on Windows option on the Mac, you'll temporarily switch over to the burn tool and then paint with the other tool. So I like using this instead of switching between tools. It just makes the whole process much faster. But anyway, I'm going to make my brush smaller by tapping on the left bracket key on the keyboard. And I'm simply going to paint with the burn tool. So in this case, I'm actually going to select the burn tool and then switch over to the dodge tool if need be by holding Alt on Windows option on the Mac. So I'm going to paint on these areas. And one thing I do want to mention is that I have highlights enabled and the exposure is pretty low. I'll even make it lower at 5% so that I can build on my adjustment and I don't add too much green. Notice these areas that as I'm painting with green, it kind of removes that color cast, like so. And watch what happens when I save this document. Control S on Windows, Command S on the Mac, and I go back into my working document. And I'll zoom in. You can see that the color cast starts disappearing so that you can see that this is working. I'm just going to work on this center part really quick. So I'll go back in here, and actually even better, let me show you a trick. I'm going to go into Window, Arrange to up vertical. So I have them both side by side. On the left hand side, I have the document that's the LAB color mode. And on the right hand side, I have my final RGB image. So working with LAB, I'm going to select the burn tool, and I'm going to make these areas darker, which in turn will add green, as you can see here. And when I save, Control S, Command S on the Mac, notice how they're fixed on the right hand side. So that's all you really have to do at this point. Just do a lot of manual labor to fix these areas. Again, I'll press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save, and you can see how these areas are becoming whiter. And obviously you can work on the roof. Let me do the roof because I think that'll be very noticeable. So Control S, Command S on the Mac to save, and you can see how I'm removing the color cast. If you wanted to, you can go into the LAB tab here, make sure that you have the background selected obviously, and then select the eyedropper tool, and then select maybe the color of this roof here. And by the way, make sure that you have 5x5 average. You don't want to do point sample because you don't want to select just one pixel and make that your sample. If the image has color noise, then you're not going to get an accurate representation of the color that you want. So doing something like 5x5 will give you an average color that is 5x5 pixels wide, and it will give you a better representation of the color that you select. So with this color selected, I'm just going to paint with the color blending mode on this roof, like you see here. See that? And I'm just basically adding that color by hand instead of doing it with the burn tool. And when I press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save, you'll see how this area gets color corrected. So that's all you have to do. You got to keep just fine tuning the image until you get the results that you want. But you can see how the building looks much, much better. Something else that I want to mention is that in the LAB color mode, you also have the Lightness channel. And this channel can be very powerful because you can apply contrast to it. You can make areas darker or brighter, and you can even add sharpening to make the image pop without affecting the color. So with my lightness layer selected, I can select the burn tool, which makes pixels darker, and I'm going to work on this right edge. See how it's so bright? And by the way, I actually still have my selection active. Remember that selection from earlier that I hid by pressing Control H is still there. So if I try to paint, I'm not going to paint anything. So I'll press Control H, Command H on the Mac to bring back the selection. And yep, there it is. And I can press Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to deselect. And now I can just paint on the edge here. And then when I save, you'll notice that this right side gets darker. Again, you're gonna have to spend some time fine tuning, but I think you'll get the idea. I'm also gonna hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac with the burn tool to brighten. In reality, I'm accessing the dodge tool. So I'm gonna brighten this top left area. And when I press Control S on Windows, Command S on the Mac to save, you can see that I brought back some detail. Of course, I would have to work with the color at that point. But as you can see, this is all that I'm doing. I'm working on each channel individually to try to bring out the color or detail that I need. Talking about detail, let me sharpen the image. With the lightness channel still selected, I'm gonna go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and from here, I'm going to go into Basic, and I'm going to add a little bit of texture. See that? Making the image pop a little bit more, maybe a little bit more of clarity. And I'm gonna scroll down and go into the Detail tab and increase the sharpening and maybe increase the masking. If you hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click and drag on the masking slider, you can see the pixels that you're affecting. Anything in white will have a sharpening effect applied to it, and anything in black will not. So I'm just gonna drag it to about here because I really don't want any sharpening in the water or those areas. And I'm also going to apply a little bit of noise reduction, and I'll zoom in so that you can see what I'm doing here. You can see that there's a lot of noise, but if I increase the noise reduction, I'll reduce it a little bit. When I press OK, Photoshop will apply that effect to the image, but it will not affect color at all. I'm keeping color and detail separate. So that's one of the good things about working in the LAB color mode. It allows you to separate those components. At this point, all I need to do is press Control S on Windows, Command S on the Mac to save, and you can see how that affected my working document. And by spending a little more time using exactly the same techniques that you saw, you'll end up with this result. This is my final result. As you can see, the building looks much, much better. There's a little bit of that color cast there, but that's okay. It's not really that noticeable. Notice that I was able to get rid of most of those imperfections in the water and the buildings up here and even down here. I did have to crop the image a little bit because the top left area didn't have a lot of detail to work with, but that's okay. And to finalize the image, I corrected the hue and saturation with the camera raw filter, and I used the color mixer for that. So what did you think about this technique? Let me know down in the comments below. If you found anything in this video useful, make sure that you click on that like button now. It really helps me and the channel with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you're new to the Photoshop training channel, make sure that you click on the subscribe and notification buttons. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again in the next Photoshop tutorial.